Hi, this is Anthony, and welcome back to my show. As I launch into this video, as always, please subscribe if you haven't already, and also click the like button and hopefully comment at the end. Today we're going to talk about pirate treasure, specifically pirate treasure buried on Neahkahnie Mountain, which is a mountain right on the edge of the coastal shoreline in northern Oregon. Now, throughout much of history, if you lived on land, and there was a threat of marauders or invaders or thieves or tax collectors coming around and stealing all your money, or you didn't trust banks because there was no deposit insurance and they were always being robbed and your money literally was at risk in a bank, then it might be a prudent thing to take some of your money and bury it under your house or in your yard or your farm. And from time to time throughout the world, people do end up digging a jar of coins that somebody had purposefully buried, whether it was in Roman times or in the 1930s in the American Midwest. But let's think about this. If you were a pirate and you had just attacked a ship and got their gold, what are you going to do with the treasure? Are you going to go off and bury it in the sand? For one thing, pirate ships, and here we're talking about actual pirates and not privateers, which are very similar but legally different. But pirate ships are now thought to have been operated on a system where any treasure that was acquired was distributed amongst all the men on that ship, with the captain getting 2 shares and everyone else getting 1 share each of the treasure. So, to make that very easy to think about, let's say that there were 99 men on a ship, including the captain. And they attacked a Spanish ship and they got 100 pieces of gold. That means, in our example, there are 98 men who are not the captain. Each of them get 1 piece of gold, and then the 99th man, who happens to be the captain, gets 2 pieces of gold. So if that's true, and that's what modern scholars believe, then the captains are not accumulating all the treasure that they may get in their acts of piracy. And of course, pirate ships probably didn't have 100 men, but it just made the math easy in this example. But if you're a pirate, the whole point of getting golden treasure is to have it so that you can spend it on things you want. You're not going to go sail off to some island and bury it in the sand, which is the worst place you could bury anything anyway. And in my first example of a farmer that lives in the Midwest in the 1930s and buries a jar of gold coins for safekeeping, he does that because he lives there and wants the money to be safe. Pirates, on the other hand, were always being chased after by other pirates and by navies of European powers, in particular Britain's Royal Navy. If a pirate ship was trying to flee the Royal Navy, they're not going to go to an island, take the time to bury their treasure, and then resume trying to flee. That would just slow them down and increase their chances of being captured. And if pirates were captured, they would be found guilty and then executed. So if you're a pirate, often under threat of being pursued or captured by the Royal Navy, you're going to keep the treasure with you. It doesn't make any sense to bury it someplace that you're unlikely to visit again. In fact, there's only one documented case of a pirate burying treasure, and that was Captain Kidd. And whether he was actually a pirate or a privateer, which is what he started out as, and then transitioned to being a pirate, is under debate. However, he did bury treasure on Gardiner's Island, off the east coast of Long Island, and then told the owners of the island where the treasure was, which was then immediately dug up, perhaps the next day, and turned over to the governor of New York to assist in Captain Kidd's defense against accusations of piracy. That's a whole nother story, but the point is there's very little evidence that pirates were going around intentionally burying chests of gold along the shoreline, or any other place for that matter. So why do people think that there's buried treasure on the slopes of a coastal mountain in Oregon? Well, there is evidence that there was a wrecked ship near that location. We'll get to that in a minute, but let's look at who the ship might have belonged to. Were there pirates that operated in this area? Absolutely not. There were not ships carrying anything of value in the northern Pacific on a regular basis, so the last place on earth that pirates would come to look for treasure-laden ships is the coast of Oregon. That being said, one candidate for being off the coast of Oregon and burying treasure was Sir Francis Drake, a daring English explorer who was not a pirate but considered a privateer. That is, somebody who had the legal right from his own government to attack the ships of enemy governments and steal whatever goods and valuables they may have. That's what Drake did to the Spanish in Mexico, and it is believed, with very little doubt, that Drake, fleeing the Spanish, sailed up the Pacific coast of what is now the United States, past California, up to some place in Oregon, whereupon he found the weather to be so unpleasant and foggy he turned around and went south and then headed west returning to England after sailing around the Cape of Good Hope in southern Africa to avoid Spaniards who were looking for him off the waters of South America. So no actual evidence of Drake leaving treasure in Oregon and absolutely no reason for him to do so. So what are some other candidates? Well, for at least 150 years, residents of the Oregon coast have found broken pieces of Chinese porcelain and chunks of beeswax along the shoreline. And existing pieces of beeswax have numbers or symbols carved into them that indicate that they'd belonged to Spanish ships. And from time to time, people on the Oregon coast have claimed to find timbers that they believed were from a Spanish galleon. So here we have some credible evidence that a Spanish galleon full of gold got wrecked on the Oregon coast, and its sailors carried chests of gold up onto Neahkahnie Mountain and buried it, right? Well, not quite. The Spanish had two kinds of treasure ships, depending on where they were coming from. There were the treasure galleons, which took gold and silver and sometimes other precious items like emeralds from the New World, usually embarking from Havana across the Atlantic onto Spain. In modern parlance, those were called treasure galleons. The other type of galleons, which also held a treasure but a different kind of treasure, were called the Manila galleons. The Manila galleons were Spanish trading ships which had 1 or 2 round-trip voyages per year between the ports of Acapulco and Manila in the Philippines, which lasted from 1565 to 1815. The Manila galleons carried a cargo of luxury goods such as spices and porcelain in exchange for New World silver. Most of the items came from China originally. However, these ships also contained beeswax from the Philippines, which was necessary to make candles for Catholic churches. So these ships did not carry gold or silver from the Philippines over to the New World, but rather luxury items, many of which might then be further transported onto Spain. So there was no gold for Spanish sailors to carry on shore and bury, either in the sand or on the slopes of Neahkahnie Mountain. But what about all those stories that you read about tales of Native Americans who saw white men carrying a treasure chest and burying it in the sand or on the mountain? Every coastal community seems to have the same story, where the white men shoot a slave and put his body on top of the chest before they fill in the hole, because they knew that the Native Americans were watching them from the woods and wouldn't dare to dig up the treasure because it would be guarded by the spirit of the killed slave. When every community has a supposed treasure with the same story, usually it's the same fable which is mutated to fit a locality different from the original story. That story, like most ones about treasure, often have very little truth in them and are more likely created by newspaper reporters centuries later to sell copies of newspapers, or authors recounting campfire ghost stories in books about so-called lost mines and treasures. What do we know about the actual ship? Researchers have now narrowed it down to what they are confident is the Santo Cristo de Burgos, which was lost at sea in 1693. Obviously, it was slightly north of where it should have been sailing, but for some reason, if it got disabled in a storm, it would very likely have drifted north a bit and ended up on the Oregon coast. It is known that 7 years later, in 1700, there was a tsunami which hit the Oregon coast, which likely further dispersed any wreckage. Is there gold to be found on Neahkahnie? Absolutely not, other than the beautiful vistas if you happen to hike there on a clear day. Can you find treasure from the galleon along the shoreline? It's possible, but be warned, the state of Oregon now considers this to be an archaeological site, and they don't want people digging up or carrying off things that they find, whether it's bits of Chinese porcelain or chunks of beeswax. And just a few months ago, in June 2022, a piece of timber believed to be from the ship, which was made out of teak wood, was removed from a coastal cave from that area by state officials. I'll have some links in the show notes that point to other articles and videos that you might find of interest on this topic. As always, thanks for watching. I hope you subscribe, like, and comment on this and my other videos. And if you want to see more videos that deal with treasures rather than stock investing, which is what most of my videos are on, then please let me know. Thanks again.